So good morning, everyone. Delegates and guests, thank you, morning. Thank you, Andre, for those lovely, kind words. Really, I did blush. Don't know where all that passion you speak about, it sounded almost inappropriate there. It is indeed a great program. I looked at it over the next few days. You've got a lot waiting for you. And really congratulations to Ancilla and Andre and Lebo and Celine and all of them for having driven this over the past years. And now hearing the next 2 years funding is clearly because of the success of the first 3 years. So that's really wonderful. Thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts with you. It's such a great event. And to champion, as Andre is saying, to champion first-year experience and how that sets the scene for higher education for a student, to champion that is really all in your credit. Thank you very much. As you just quickly say, while I've got the minute, the JSA, he's quite right, the Journal for Student Affairs, I think, Ancilla, you will be doing a guest-edited issue out of these papers. So I'm sure you'll announce it again over the next few days. Any of your papers that you would like to see published, please write them up, send them to Ancilla. She'll be guest editing an issue, and it is indeed accredited, and it is really to all the people who've worked at that, at the journal, credit to them for having gotten it this far. So I want to focus a little bit today on the more unexpected lessons we learned from the unrest in 2015 and 16, and how this has sharpened our understanding of our role in higher education, and particularly the first-year experience. We know, of course, from the last 2 years that we need to accelerate transformation. There's no doubt in that. We want to advance issues of race, gender. We need to change issues in patriarchy. Masculine notions around masculinity do need to change in this country. We need to transform what it means to live in South Africa. Gender violence crisis is at its highest. Student access and success needs to be accelerated. And the entire cultural, the national focus on the culture, so the national culture needs to change in order to focus on education. So we know that, and that I think has been driven home very clearly over the last 2 years. But for higher education, I want to focus a little bit on the more unexpected things that I think has happened to us in higher education, particularly management, and you as program conveners and people who manage resources and budgets and students and programs. Something else has come to the fore, and that's the lesson I want to reflect on. Some of you may know, as been mentioned, that I've moved from first UCT, then UWC, Stellenbosch. I was at Berkeley sometime, at NYU. And it's quite interesting when one looks at the institutions and how they manage complexities. And it's quite useful to then abstract from how they manage it to see what the lessons are. And these I want to share with you. I think in sum, we've learned to live in very, very complex times. The fast pace of change was described as the new normal. And we needed to face complexities and paradoxes more than we had to in the previous 2 decades in higher education. And we will continue to be asked to do this in higher education. So we know, and it's plainly written on the wall, that if we don't overcome our differences and our challenges, and if we don't change the way we engage from combative to collaborative, then we are probably not going to outlast the 21st century. We need to find ways to overcome the differences, conflicts, and uncertainties, and we need to take risks to develop multiple solutions in collaborative ways. This is what we learned during the unrest, and this is what our students need to learn too. And not only our first-year students, all students it is, especially as they must face the complexity and contradictions of living in South Africa as adults. Let me show you a little bit. Let me see if this works. Hold on. Does this work? Yeah. So let me show you a little bit of what it looks like when students arrive at higher education. This is the kind of world they're facing. And you can see in student unrest ideas about decolonializing higher education and what that means for different pockets and parts of higher education. They faced with issues of the rape culture. There were a lot of debates last year about rape culture, and they will continue this year. I put that one picture in the middle of this child that was found, you recall that, in the Mediterranean. And that's kind of the brutal world full of contradictions that these students need to face when they grow up and come into higher education. So we speak about rape culture, and we speak about the dangers of patriarchy, and then we have a president that has a good woman standing in front of him saying, "Remember Kwesi." So it's these kinds of contradictions that we need to face. Just at the bottom left, you see Quebec. So I'm putting this picture in to show that this is not just a South African issue. It is really around the world that higher education and youth is in a very fractious space. And then in the bottom right, you see women who feel that they need to go to such lengths to speak about the rights to their bodies or to protect their bodies and speak about rape culture. In the middle, you see, of course, some other offensive pictures there. So there we are. So this is kind of, this is the world that they see when they arrive. It's complex, brutal, illogical, nonsensical, tense, combative, and full of contradictions. Now let me make this clear. I don't for 1 minute think that the children in South Africa don't know about this world already when they arrive with us. A world where parents hurt children, where we have so much abundance and yet our students go hungry, where we try to educate our students about patriarchal power abuse, and then we have a president with a rape scandal and many other scandals hanging over his head, where we have the political and economic elite enriching themselves more and more while the social service grants fail to feed our fellow South Africans, where we have our brightest students arrive at university and they leave more alienated and disillusioned than they arrived. The world in which rich and poor live next to one another, both trying to deal with the incomprehensible complexities of living in this South Africa. So yes, our students do know about this world, but over the period of the student unrest, this has become more pulled into focus. The contradictions for many of us was also that we identified very much with the student struggle, but we didn't know how to deal with it, and we were caught in all kinds of impossible positions. And that is, I think, something that universities have learned to deal with. But it's not only locally that we see such confusion and paradoxes and unrest, but also beyond our borders. Who didn't wake up that morning when we heard the results of Brexit? How can England extract itself from the biggest peace treaty in Europe and shun the responsibilities for problems that face everyone? It was just shocking to hear that a country would choose to do this, and that there were people in that country that would choose this as an option. But Brexit wasn't the only thing that shocked us, and then there was Trump. So when we heard the tapes of his trashy misogyny, and we were certain that logic would prevail, and people would vote with their minds, and they didn't. They went and voted for Trump. And let me just give you a statistic here. 53% of white women in America voted for Trump. How is this possible? So these are the kinds of issues that our students need to see and they need to deal with. Just give you another statistic here. As opposed to 4% of African American women voted for Trump, and they're the only ones clearly who kept their thinking hat on while they voted. So overall in South Africa, we have a culture of conflict and combat. Violence and disengagement has become normative, and clannish groups dominate the political and social spaces. The intersection of power with race and gender haunts us, and we only see sporadic active participation in our democracy. The national discontent has reached unprecedented proportions in South Africa, and this, no doubt, fueled the student unrest that we saw over the past few years. But it's not only the student and youth anger that we needed to make sense of, it was also the context within which this occurred. Universities are contested terrains. We're reimagining ourselves and repositioning ourselves as very earnest and effective instruments of social justice. It is the very space that we are in that is shifting and changing dramatically around us. Higher education and the universities have become one of the few effective social mobility avenues. And while the TVET sector is not offering this avenue as reliably as the universities, we're in the space where young people look towards for wanting to better their lives. So the system is needing to reshape itself into a mass education tool for which it is not designed nor equipped. So our world is changing and shifting, creating uncertainties and challenges. What then happens to how we engage with it? What happens to us when we feel surrounded by uncertainty, by new realities and change? We get scared. And what happens to us when we get scared? The psychological and neuropsychological research and findings tell us a lot here. Our brains change, our perceptions change, our behavior changes. First, our adrenaline comes up, cortisol comes up. We live in a state of hyper-arousal and hyper-alertness. We feel anxious and we withdraw. We retreat into our corners. We retreat into binary thinking, simplistic solutions, them, they thinking, blaming. We distrust others and become defensive and aggressive. So we tend to reduce information input. We ask fewer questions when we're scared. Our social circle becomes smaller, and we focus inwards. We think a lot in terms of them and they, and we blame, and we get angry. We innovate less, we take less risks, and we learn less. So this is what happens to us when we're stressed. Time gets less, we are more and more anxious, information feels contradictory, anxiety dominates us, we're distrusting, we withdraw. But this is the paradox. In order to resolve the complexities that we are facing, we need to do the opposite of what stress is making us do. Marlin in 2014 did a lovely paper on leading in complex contexts, and she lists a few critical characteristics on how complex situations require us to be. And this is the lesson we need, that we have learned over the past few years. And our responses to complex and conflicting realities needs to take on new forms. So the requirement really for how we need to engage when we're stressed, or in complex realities. So in order to resolve complex contexts and to respond well in times of stress, we need to open up and listen more, not less. We need to seek more information from unlikely sources, not shut people out. We need to be satisfied with good and reasonable solutions. We need to be comfortable with a variety of solutions, not fixated on the perfect one. We need to engage in fluid and multiple ways, seeking support from unlikely sources. We need to take risks, look towards novel and innovative ways of unlocking challenges. We need to accept that old rules and patterns have changed. This then becomes the new engagement style, managing this tension between, on the one hand, feeling scared and feeling in a combative space because of stress, but at the same time needing to mobilize characteristics and competencies in us that are really quite counterintuitive. This is what we must develop, new ways of engaging. So that then brings me back to our first year experience and to our students and to your work with students. Our students need to learn this lesson too. Our focus needs to be on teaching complexity and diversity, tolerating paradoxes and contradictions. Exactly what we've learned over the past years, or what we should have learned. I shouldn't speak so idealistically here. We need to share with our students. This should be the focus for our student development, introducing students to the complex realities where they need to guard against binary thinking or quick answers, guard against simplistic reasoning and simplistic solutions. Managing this tension, on the one hand facing new challenges in an unpredictable, complex environment, feeling anxious and stressed, and on the other hand, guarding against retreating into simplistic and binary thinking, dominated by aggression and defense. So we need students that can take risks and think innovatively, and listen and open up despite feeling stressed and anxious. So I just want to make sure you understand me correctly. I don't get that right either. I think it's a very difficult thing when one feels compromised to not leap into quick blame language and an us and a them thinking. I do it too when I feel very stressed. The more I'm stressed, the more I see myself doing the very behaviors that I mustn't do in order to get myself out of stress. It's a very difficult thing, and I'm in my late 40s and I'm still not getting it right all the time. So students can be forgiven for not getting it right. But I just want us to make us aware of what they face when they come in being 18 and having to face this kind of tension. So when we think about the first year experience over the next few days, Ancilla, Lebo and Andre, and colleagues, whether we work in the orientation program or we think about how best we design peer learning experiences, when we use technology or e-learning platforms, when we think about ECPs or we look on the data, towards data for our programs, I hope that we always keep in mind that our students, like ourselves, have to face complex and contradictory demands. They are scared and angry, just like we are. And that needs to be our underlying, or if you will, overarching principle, enabling a deep sense of engaging across the unknown, listening and seeking innovation and original solutions, acknowledging the complex and contradictory world, and letting all versions be valid. That is very difficult, and I hope, regardless which programs we do, that we enable students to develop that capacity. So then, I took out the best practices, because best practices are really made for ideal and simple contexts, and we're no longer there. We're in a space where contexts change fast, and we need to settle with good solutions and good practices that guide us forward. And they need to be nimble and fast to adjust quickly as the world around us changes. So above all, we need to assist the students in developing the kind of resilience which assists them in opening up to new ideas and new ways of being with each other. Let me introduce a last thought. So it should be part of all first-year experience programs. All our work needs to be closely aligned to the graduate attributes which explicitly state these goals of fluid cognitive competencies. The graduate attributes and the related learning outcomes which most institutions here have, I'm sure most of you here have graduate attributes that you work towards as an outcome. So the graduate attributes and learning outcomes need to reflect this cognitive fluidity and psychosocial maturity I've been talking about. It is essential that these kinds of fluid and resilient mental and emotional social competencies find expression in the graduate attributes and the related learning outcomes. So when we design and shape the programs that you do shape, the mentoring orientation programs, the tutoring or support programs, these need to be aligned explicitly with the kinds of competencies that we're speaking about here. Student success is having cognitive fluidity, reaching across the divide and across difference, engaging with complexities and paradoxes. So let me come to an end and focus us on the task ahead. So we focus not only on our work in the first year and the undergraduate experience, but also on the immense task of developing students who can manage the tensions inherent in the complex and contradictory world of today. Our students must become universal citizens with a deep sense of social justice, simultaneously African and citizens of the world, simultaneously activist and listener, agents of change and someone who honors heritage, someone who views others as equals and also sees the difference. This is imagining a vision for success. Our students need to be able to master the tensions inherent in being alive in South Africa today. And this is our new struggle. This is our new challenge. I thank you.